I've clicked onto the global tropical overview for July the 25th, 2024. As is always the case in these videos, the flood expected to remain alone. If you're going to make any decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look to your local office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. So we've got a few systems to talk about today across the tropics worldwide. We're going to first touch on Typhoon Gaemi as it now pushes offshore of Taiwan this morning. You can see the system on infrared over the past 12 hours has had an interesting interaction with the high terrain of Taiwan. We talked about this being possible yesterday, but it went right towards the coast. It was right about to make landfall, and then last minute turned due south and then did a loop and spent a few more hours offshore. Now, the system did continue to weaken, as you can see with the convection sort of fading before that landfall, but the unfortunate effect of this is to continue to bring a lot of heavy rainfall over to the high terrain of Taiwan. And I don't have exact measurements on exactly how much rainfall we've gotten over the past day in Taiwan, but I'm sure it's a lot. And based on some model forecasts, it could easily be 400 or 500 millimeters of rainfall in the past day. Now, this storm is not done impacts-wise for Taiwan, even though it is moving offshore. If we look at the radar composite out of Taiwan, you can see here's the center. It's very dry. It's very beaten up. It's not going to be strengthening much more, which is good news for China. But note that we have this massive band of rainfall continuing to push right through Taiwan, and especially for southwestern Taiwan, this is going to be a very dangerous event continuing, even though the system is well north of you, as we have this continued onshore push and right into the terrain. And you can think of it as like a sponge that you've put under a sink, so it's got a lot of water in it. Think of that sponge as the atmosphere. There's a lot of moisture in it. What the mountains will help do when this moisture runs right into them is it's going to be squeezing that moisture out. So if you have that sponge, squeeze it out, all the water comes out. That's the effect of the terrain, and this will likely maximize rainfall totals across southwestern Taiwan throughout the day today. And we could be looking at, on top of whatever has already fallen here, an additional 400, 500 millimeters of rainfall in this portion of the island. And you can see that here on the GFS ensemble. This is an average of 31 different runs of the GFS, showing over the next couple of days 400 to 500 millimeters of rainfall, maybe more, in the southern and central part of Taiwan. Now, note how in the northern part we still get some rainfall, but it's not, 400, 500 millimeters of rainfall. One important thing about that is, even though this is not overly high and, values of 100 millimeters, 150 millimeters may not sound like much, if we have gotten, 400, 500 millimeters of rainfall, it does not take much at all to cause additional flooding issues. And you can even get that with 50 millimeters of rainfall. So this is going to still persist to be a very significant flooding threat for the entire island of Taiwan. And one thing as well is we're continuing to get still some onshore push along the east coast and especially along the southwest coast of Taiwan. And it's going to keep some water rising, some elevated water levels along the coast of Taiwan. I don't know that we're getting much more water rise particularly, maybe some in southwest Taiwan, but we're probably still just getting the water to stay at an elevated level along the coastline here. But the problem with that is now this water along the immediate coast it's sitting at a higher level than normal. And as the fresh water from the rainfall tries to rush down to the ocean, it's a convergence zone. So you have the fresh water trying to come in, and it meets up with that salt water, and you just end up with a lot of flooding as an effect of that. Alongside that, with these mountains, you can get a lot of water runoff from these mountains, and that could easily cause mudslide issues. And I can't overstate the flooding threat that continues here across Taiwan. Now, the good news is the system is moving at a fairly brisk pace off towards the west-northwest, and we'll probably be dealing with rainfall for at least the next day. But as we get into say Friday, we'll probably start to clear things out in Taiwan, and then we can look at, the damage and see about recovery. But as of now, there's no reason to go out driving, and especially do not drive into flooded waters, as that is the one main thing that is unfortunately a big killer in these tropical cyclones. Is heavy rainfall, flood that causes flooding, but also storm surge. So don't drive into any flooded waters. Now, For the coast of China, the good news is, and I alluded to this earlier, the core is busted. It is completely destroyed. There's no eye wall to speak of, which you would expect as it went through very high terrain. And this is not going to allow it to strengthen really at all. Now, one thing that's important is it is still a large storm. You can see this on the H-Wharf. We still got this very large band of strong winds that is pushing right onto the coast. And this could, one, be bringing a lot of strong winds to everyone along this part of the coast, but also this is going to help push a lot of ocean water right onto this coast. And one aspect of this coast, as you can see, there's a lot of inlets here, there's a lot of bays, and that's a perfect spot for storm surge to sneak its way in, and you can really maximize storm surge impacts by having a coastline like that. You know, one thing with Taiwan is a lot of this coast is fairly straight. There's not a lot of bays overall on this coast. But here we've got a lot of bays here, and this is just a nice funnel, if you will, or a catcher's mitt. It's one thing a lot of people use as an example for this. It's just a big catcher's mitt for the water to go into, and this could easily cause a lot of flooding issues as well along the immediate coast. And we'll also be getting this rainfall to come in. You can see again on this forecast from the GFS ensemble, lots of dark purples and some pinks here showing up. We've got, you know, potential for 150 millimeters to 200 millimeters of rainfall along this part of the coast in China. And as the system continues to push in, it will be losing some of its moisture as it comes in, so rainfall totals are not as significant, but we could still be getting some increased rainfall inland. And note this little area here as well along the coast that sort of juts up north. This could be part of the storm circulation, bringing some additional rainfall, maybe up as far north as Shanghai, as the system may be over here, but its circulation is still quite big, so it could be bringing some additional moisture here, and we could get some additional rainfall along that part of the coastline. But stay safe in Taiwan and China as the system pushes through. This will probably be my last video on this storm, but we're not done in the tropics, as we've got a few other things to talk about over the next couple of weeks as we start to close off July. One thing is in the East Pacific. This is Tropical Storm Bud. This storm formed a few hours ago, a bit unexpectedly. It kind of shot up in formation probabilities today, as ASCAT had confirmed a well-defined and closed low-level center underneath of this fairly organized convection. This meets the definition of a tropical storm, and as such, the NHC has initiated advisories on Tropical Storm Bud. Now, this storm is very weak and staying out to sea. You can see it's really in the middle of nowhere. You can see on the true color imagery, here's the coast of Mexico, here's Baja California. So it's way out there, only a couple islands, but even then, the center of circulation is staying away from those. And the system is getting a little bit sheared. You can see part of the low-level center is a bit exposed. There's an upper high bringing a lot of westerly flow across this part, or easterly flow across this part of the East Pacific. And this will likely keep the system fairly weak. Alongside that, there's a lot of cooler sea surface temperatures further north, and while right now on the forecast, the system is forecast to stay south of the 26-degree isotherm, it does have a good inflow band on the north side, and this could be moving right over those cooler sea surface temperatures, and that could be bringing in some additional dry air that gets mixed in to the storm. And overall, this gets you a weak forecast from the NHC, not really anticipating much strengthening from the impacts of that potential dry air issues, and also the increased wind shear that we're having from that upper high. And you could see keeping this very weak and just staying in the middle of nowhere, affecting nobody. But this is not it for the East Pacific as we go throughout the next couple of weeks. Now, for the past few weeks, we've had rising air in the West Pacific. That's what helped get us our 3 systems in the West Pacific over the past couple of weeks. But now we're into a transitional phase where we're now looking towards the MJO, the Meta-Julian Oscillation, moving east into the East Pacific and Atlantic, and this is probably going to favor these 2 basins as we head into early August. You can see the areas of concern from the Climate Prediction Center. This is their weekly outlook outlining tropical development. You can see in the first couple of weeks as we close off July, we could still be looking at some development in the West Pacific as the MJO departs. But we start to see increasing probabilities in the East Pacific and the Atlantic. They've highlighted two areas. We've got one with higher odds in the East Pacific, greater than 40% chance of tropical development there offshore of Mexico, and one in the Caribbean and tropical Atlantic there, though that's a bit less odds right now due to some uncertainty with maybe some sinking air over Africa. And you can see these two areas persist into mid-August on this forecast. And you can see on this forecast of the MJO, it sort of starts to propagate east into regions 8 and 1, which generally favors this part of the world. Now, one thing about the MJO is you'll see it remains fairly weak here. It will probably not be a very strong MJO pulse, just thanks to the La Nina. That tends to weaken the MJO as it comes east. But we still do see a signal of rising air in green here, which is favorable for tropical development. Still taking place in the East Pacific and the Atlantic, though you can see that sinking cell there still over Africa, which could maybe cause some issues for storms that may develop offshore of Africa, but they could still be tropical waves that eventually form out west here in this rising air. But you can see, again, green here across these two basins, right in where the CPC has marked these two areas. Now, in the short term, we've got really nothing to talk about in the Atlantic. We do have one other area of interest in the Eastern Pacific. Here's Bud out here. It's way out here. It's not marked on the map, but you can see it's right there. And this is another little disturbance within the monsoon trough. And this is only given a 10% chance of development. The system also has the same issue as Bud, lots of westerly flow, but also it's still attached to the monsoon trough. And the monsoon trough being this far north doesn't allow much time for it to detach sufficiently and get into development before the sea surface temperatures really start to drop off. And that will likely stop this system from really developing all too much. But we'll continue to watch it, 10% chance. But the good news is here, no threat to land in either basin over the next 7 days at least. And again, we're looking at these two areas of interest in the CPC, but we've got time before this does see any formation in these basins. Now, one thing I want to point out is that it's July 25th now, based on UTC time that is. We're quickly approaching the peak of hurricane season. In the East Pacific, peak season is in August. The Atlantic, it's in September. And time is running out to finalize your preparedness plans for hurricane season. It should already be done, but for those who have not done it yet, you still have some time. The climatological peak of the Atlantic hurricane season is September 10th, but we are still seeing signs that the Atlantic is going to be very active as we get particularly to late August through September, and it's very important that you're prepared. It's no guarantee, of course, that you're going to get hit by any hurricanes, but you want to be prepared. And of course, in Mexico as well, on the Pacific side, this has been a very quiet Pacific hurricane season. We've only had 2 named storms so far, but it's important to remember it only takes one storm to make a season very devastating, and you need to be prepared as the season goes on. Not seeing any strong signals in any near future in the East Pacific right now, but it's still something to keep in mind as we go into these peak months of hurricane season. And I'll, of course, have my updated hurricane season outlook for the Atlantic as we go into the first week of August, and we'll see how we're doing on the forecast for a very active hurricane season. That's all that I've got for today. Thanks for watching. Stay safe in Taiwan and China as our typhoon moves through those areas. I'll again leave some links to the Taiwan Weather Service and the China Weather Service as well at the top of the description, so you can go to those websites directly and get the information you need. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.